Alrighty, great games at your table. I'm Jonathan Albin, Game Master J, and I am here wishing you felicitations and salutations for your holiday season, and I hope everything is going great for you. Before we get started tonight, I do have a bit of a note for those that are familiar with the channel and some of our greatest supporters and assistants, and we wanted to bring everyone's mind to the condition of our very good friend Jean Acker. You know her as several different characters in the game sessions that I run, and she has been a loyal and supportive person for the whole time that I've known her, and she has been with us actively clear back to the original Cauldron days when we were running live stream games on YouTube. And I wanted to let everyone know that she is recovering fairly well. She had an accident and fell at her home recently, and actually fractured her patella in a couple of places. As you may know, Jean is a survivor of diabetes and has had the lower portion of her leg removed. And the other day when she tumbled, it was all the way to the ground on that side, and so the patella, her kneecap, was broken in two different places, and so they currently have her in a hospital, and we just want to thank her and have all good thoughts and prayers lent in her direction, and to thank her ever so much for all of the support she's provided to us for the many years we've been on the air, and to in particular thank her for her service in the name of Nycos. She is the person who, after all, coined the phrase that she exists in the earth on this world, but she lives in Nycos. And so just want to wish her good things. If you are looking to dedicate anything to her or whatever, we do have a informal activity right here through the website. So if you want to assist, you can look into that information. We'll have more available for you very soon on the Discord channel, so make sure you check that out as well. Now, before we get started today, we have an absolutely chock full schedule. We're going to be doing updates on 3 of the 4 campaigns, and we also have information on the final avatar, if you will, of the Orders of the Veils, and also have some more surprises. So stay with us and let's get started, shall we? Alrighty, we're going to start off with the Eastern Skies campaign. This is the Saturday afternoon game. Ostensibly, we will eventually be able to go stable on a live stream, but we've had some issues with players and schedules and such like. So in this case, the information is they are continuing to explore an area known as the Everburn. It's in the northern area of Cryopathia, which is why we use the Cryopathian banner here to show where they are in the world. They are in the passages beyond the Arboretum. As you may recall, they had found a facility underground where there was enough artificial light and water and such to sustain a living arboretum. And in exploring that, they had determined that there were things that were going on that were far too odd and mysterious, and so they wanted to try to get a feel for how these things were being accomplished. And so they went to look behind the curtain, so to speak. As they did so, they discover a shoebox-sized element, some form of automata, very small, and in researching or trying to discover how to communicate with it, it was discovered that Gear, one of the enjoined party members, who is a technomata, actually had the capability to communicate with it, and so they began a conversation. And as they did so, they began to discuss the merits of diplomacy, and this was done in a very odd way because the little technomata kept insisting that Gear was not only unwanted, undesirable, but perhaps should be dismantled and uh, pardon me, to have him, if not tortured, at least disassembled to gather information about his history. They were introduced to a spherical technomata, a globe by the name of Sylvester, spelled as you can see here rather odd with the typical technomata alphanumerics misinterpretation, but Sylvester was very concerned with how a destrier like Gear had gotten so far into a structure and a culture that should have been able to keep him out, having for themselves the concept that they were dredges and therefore not a part of the destrier culture, and therefore considered the destriers to be opponents and oppositions. And when that was discovered, the players decided they had to either choose to stay and fight against the incoming security technomata, or they were going to run. And after a few tense moments, they were able to break out and make a run for it. There was a rather dangerous situation where the technomata very nearly were able to catch them, but Gear switched into his mobilization mode and dropped down onto his wheels, and carrying Valkyrie and the others to safety, ran for it. And literally they went from the frying pan into the actual fire, as when they surfaced, they were actually adjacent to the burnout, the large building near the lake of fire itself, and they have now arrived at the burnout. So we will see what happens next week. Now we're going to move to the setting of Strangers in the Strange Land. This is the Sunday games group. No, this is the Monday games group. I got ahead of myself. The Sunday game, because of Gene's incident, was unable to be held, and so this game on Monday actually normally would have included Marianne, but she was unable to make it. So, having said that, they make the decision to travel into the chambers beneath the cauldron. This cauldron being the cooking pot that they discovered in the closet at Kagan Gelf's home. And having moved it out of the way, they find a staircase, a ladder actually, that led down into a chamber that led them further into the area beneath the city itself. And as they had come to a place of two passages, they had chosen the leftmost passage and had passed into the earliest chambers of what they had determined to be the lost city of Jadurun, a gnomish city that had fallen to ruin near the end of the previous iteration. And in discovering this, they attempted to find their way about in the chambers, and found that there were not just constructed tunnels with dangerous traps mounted at each, but also that there were hand-dug burrows between the chambers, and feared that may mean an additional engagement with the Greylings. And so they chose to back out, and even as they did have a bit of an altercation with the Greylings that forced them to retrace their steps, as they did not see any signs of the hostages they were looking for. So they went back and took the right passage, and even if it hadn't been correct, they would have been on the right path, so to speak. You know me and my puns. But now they were on this path, not only did they find tracks and evidence that perhaps a large group had passed by, but they also discovered at least one member of the grayling population who was suffering from something that appeared to be the very vanishing disease that they were warned of. And so this leads, of course, to more questions than answers. Are they now going to be subject to the illness? A couple of the players did interact with the grayling, and so we have yet to see whether or not there will be any possibility of infection. So we'll be following that, of course, in each story going forward. Finally, we're going to talk about the Skiffborn, and the Skiffborn group had also discovered ruins. In their case, they were entering into the remains of Landovia and literally found themselves in water over their heads. Only for a short period, though. It seemed that the entrance into the underground caverns there was blocked by a doorway that was flooded, and so they passed through it and narrowly survived. One of the players very nearly drowned there, and once they had attained this inner chamber, they discovered a virtual underground world that they did not expect to find. They seemed to be not so near the surface as they had originally intended, but instead were rather deep in what may have actually been part of the Everdark, of which they're not certain at this point. But they did find there the remains of two figures buried in the mossy debris near the water. What appeared to be a Grundam, who was in a rather bad state, having had both of his legs broken before he was demised, and the remains of an Eldrin. And the Eldrin form suggested that he was of not only noble birth, but of a military heritage. So it lent the concept that perhaps Landovia had more allies than originally anticipated, as both of these species were not originally spoken of in the Landovian record. Now, in this facility, they found further evidence that this may have been some form of religious enclave, as several different representations of what might have been veil worship seemed to be constructed right there near the access way. So as they rounded a corner, they found themselves facing a very odd sight in given where they thought they were. It appeared that they could see a basalt ziggurat in the distance, not represented in any of the local maps or even any historical record of such being within the boundaries of Landovia. Furthermore, they had an encounter with a, shall we say, a food processor. A large worm-like beast came up and out of the ground and began making its way towards them, suggesting that they would be made into a localized food source. And of course, the majority of the players determined that they would run away, but one of them did seem to have somewhat of a Jenkins attack and charged the monstrosity. Fortunately for him, the NycosRPG combat system quickly determined that he had survived the engagement, and he was then able to be extracted by his friends, who heroically drove this beast, this processor, away, and then they were able to affect the processes of healing and such, and they had to deal with somewhat of the aftermath of what might have been a complete TPK, but instead was only a near TPK. And there was some interesting dynamics involved because the players who had never been in such a situation did feel the visceral fear of the end of their personas. So after that, they did take the time to rest, regroup, and recover, and prepare for next week to delve further into this mysterious new world they found themselves in. Now, I did mention that the Sunday group did not host, as Jean was unable to be there. The rest of the group felt that they would be remiss in running the story forward without her. So, again, I want to mention if you want to know more information about her, contact us through the Discord channel, which is listed down below, or leave us a message in either the chat or at our YouTube page at NycosRPG. All right. Next, we're going to talk about the veils, and we have a single one left. And what do you think? Which one do you think that I saved for last of all? That's right. I would save for last of all, fall. I know, me and my wordplays. We're going to talk a bit about the Lady Vol, perhaps the least understood and yet the most feared of the avatars of the Veils is Vol. According to legend, she was the first to stand and the last to fall in the final moments before the Revening. Believed, however, to be an unenjoined, Vol is still a mystery. The Vaults, as her followers and adherents are called, seek power simply for its own sake, and as such they prefer magical effects that would monopolize resources, drawing essence from living things and inanimate objects alike. Not satisfied with small demonstrations, the Vaults have caused quakes and floods, fires and famines, all to garner even a single individual new acolyte. After all, it is all about the power. They are known to disguise their actions as those of the other Veils on occasion in order to undermine and confuse the followers of the Veils, as it is their quiet quest for system-wide domination of all of the Veils indeed. All right, so this next section is an extension of the Nycos Launchpad, and I want to ask you if you would like to play a game. The evidence is in, from my research, that we are, if you will, living in a simulation. And what I mean by that is I'm not referring to a matrix or anything like that, but the reality is that every one of us lives in a world where we choose what roles we wish to play. And what I'm going to suggest is I want to talk about setting up session 0 for the game of your life, of my life, and how we can endeavor to utilize the mechanisms of role-playing games in order to align ourselves more perfectly with the world we would like to see. After all, our successful pattern in life has as much a character pattern as any character we would make for a role-play game. So we simply have to figure out how to create the role, and then we build our lives into that place. So we're going to talk about how some of these session 0 questions need to go so that we can build into actually running the game of our lives and aligning ourselves with the concepts that we put together here. So the first thing is to rethink the concept of building character. When you speak of it in a role-play game, generally speaking, you get out a piece of paper, you write down some numbers, you roll some dice, and then you imagine, create out of whole cloth, if you will, the persona that we're going to play. And many times these persona are very different from ourselves. I mean, some of them may be close, some of them, as a matter of fact, at least once in everybody's life, I believe they try to play a character that's kind of like them in a role-play game. It's just simply the way we think. But in this case, what if you rethink? What if you put together a different concept? So in this case, we're talking about the concept of actually building our character. And I'm speaking of the concept of the higher philosophies, the higher views that we might have of ourselves, and how do we build our character. I mean, there are so many different ways you could define that. It kind of boggles the mind. But the reality is here, we're talking about what realistic mechanisms can we put in place to make ourselves more than we are, better than we are, and literally how do we go about doing that? Well, the first thing is to having reconsidered, let's build out the concept in our minds of what it is we want. We have to develop what our game value parameters are. What's important to you? What is it you want to accomplish in life? Perhaps you want to be a better singer, or you want to do more presentations and you want to be able to speak in front of a camera or an audience. Maybe you want to have closer friends and a tighter relationship with those people that are in your life. Perhaps you want to repair damage that's been done in your family over time, and you found there to be weak places that you would like to shore up and make the experience of life more sweet. These are all possible parameters. But so when we're building a character, when we are building our character, we need to think through these things and come up with an outline. As you may recall, one of my more recent videos that was highly popular was one about the concept of chainstorming. And this session 0 is in essence the beginning of your chainstorm to start to build what you want for your persona, what you want from your real life that you don't have right now. And how do we go about getting there? We need to build a record of your character skill sets, like a CV or a resume. The idea of writing down what it is you're actually able to do, what you currently have as skills, is very important, because once you have a catalog of what you know you have, you can look for the gaps in that structure towards what you're trying to aim at, so that you say, well, for example, I have been working on my public speaking, and although I do still have to deal with the mechanical issues of my Bell's palsy, I feel like I'm doing a better job of sticking to a speech pattern that is reasonable and getting rid of as many verbal pauses as I can, and to think as I speak so that the words that come out are the words that I expect to and intend to. But beyond that, of course, there's always the possibility of getting a speech coach or watching videos about speaking that will give me more information. There are thousands of really good coaches out there, and I may be endeavoring to pursue that kind of thing in the future. We'll have to see. But the idea is that you want to establish your record of what character skills you have at the beginning, so you can observe that advancement over time. Now, this does mean that you have to really make some really hard decisions and even harder assessments about your current skill, because all of us would like to think that we have what we need, that we are complete, that we can actually pursue what we want to pursue right now. And the reality is there may be gaps that need to be overcome. I know that in the case of my video production, I did have to change up my lighting, change up the positioning, and even change up my appearance so that it was more acceptable and appreciable, and I could actually reach out to you more efficiently. These are all hard things to look at, but then to try to figure out a graduated success-fail score, that can be downright daunting. But in order to be able to know and recognize the levels of progression as you go forward, in a role-play game, it's easy. You're doing it on numerics and you're rolling random dice. In this case, we're doing the role-playing of our lives, so to speak. We're building ourselves into the role we want for our lives. Now, it doesn't mean anything false or fake. I want to make that clear. When I speak of the role-playing of the life you want, I think everybody's sort of looking for authenticity We want everyone to be as truthful to who they are as possible. And I think I've done that in some of my recent videos, and I'm going to continue to do so going forward. But these processes require really a hard assessment to say, well, am I where I want to be? No. Well, what do I have yet to do? And so as you build these checklists, you start to build the processors, if you will, for the domino principle. And we'll go more into that, of course, in later videos. The main thing, therefore, is to consider the 3 E's, which are, in this case, education, exposure, and experience. Yes, you want to have education. If there are subjects of which you know nothing, definitely need to endeavor to learn something about them. If you are looking for getting the practice in to do the things that you want to do, you have to set a pattern and a rhythm to gain that exposure. Yes, in the case of making videos, it's easy to just keep trying. But if you don't keep trying with a measured finger on the pulse to know when you've made a success and when you've made a flop, you're not going to make any advancement. Now, this means not only to assess the skills that you currently have, but as you discover them going forward, or whether it be to discover those that are latent that you already had and didn't know about, or you're talking about those that are emerging that you started working on and are seeing some advancement in, or even those that are just absolutely intentional. You just know you need to learn them. However you discover your skills and whatever level you find them to be honest in building out this character portfolio, because when you start to look at realistically where you are, it's only fair to see where there's advancement and to acknowledge where there's a lack of effort. This really comes down to something that I learned a long time ago. The saying goes that small people love things and use people. And the wisest of men I always say it backward, that they like people and use things. And it's really important to realize that our economic status, our self-promotion status, and all of these things are associated with how well we interact with others. And to get the proper alignment of items and things to the people in your life, to see how important it is to be helpful to others, really is critical to the success we might have. And I'm going to also mention something else. Most of you have heard over the years the idea that you have to work hard. If you work really hard, you should succeed. And it doesn't seem so to be if you look at the people who are drawing in the high dollars and all of this. But the reality is that your work should be done in the meta of the game. In other words, when we are together on the screen and we're talking, this isn't for me in the real. This is how I am. With the way you see me in my game sessions is the way I am in reality. And when it comes down to actually doing the physical labor of my life, doing my laundry and stuff like that, I don't necessarily share that aspect, because to me, that's operating in the meta. That's things that have to be done. They have to be taken care of. The cleaning and the washing and all that kind of stuff, it actually does exist. We all suffer it, and it's reality. But if we live in that place where we work, then our mindset becomes ingrained into the work of our lives. And when you are thinking about working and you're not living, you're not becoming more than who you are. It's like when you're a child and you are playing at a game or whatever, you are completely in that moment and you are a part of that, and you are learning, because that's what you are doing, is you're opening your mind to creativity and new concepts and ways of thinking that you may not have had before. And reality is that when we do the work of life, we actually are shutting down that portion and doing just the mundane. So I'm going to suggest that you think in reverse, and that is play in the real. When you are going to your place of employment, love what you do, love what you are attempting, love your successes, relish those moments, but That is the playful side of life. Don't make that the work of life, because when you make the life into work, it loses its luster and it loses its fun. And so I'm going to be advocating for the reverse of what you might think. Instead of running off to work every morning, you should be running off to play, because that's what we're made to do. We are intended to be learning, inquisitive, creative beings, and we can only do that when we are in a state of play. So we'll get more into that. Now, I will have to say that I love this phrase. Life is actually the game. We are all merely players, as Shakespeare would say, and he would speak of it in terms of the theater, but that's because that's what he loves. In my case, I believe that it is that everything that we do is part of a large scale game of which we are a part. And so I use the phrase go play as sort of a double entendre. Not only am I saying go and play, which is absolutely true, I'm also saying go play, as in play is an amazing way to live. So go play. And I hope to see you soon in that aspect as well. So let's move on. Okay, so many times you've heard game masters and storytellers give tips and techniques and tricks on how to do their job, and almost always it's forthtelling. They are presenting things, and I'm guilty of this as well. Often I will tell you what to do or what works for me, and I'm not doing a lot to show you what really goes on. So I want to talk today about what it's like to be behind the scenes. What do you have to actually bring to the table to be a competent game master and storyteller? So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the idea of being familiar with the lore. If you're going to tell a story, by golly, you should know the ins and outs of the story. To some person's mindset, that means you have to memorize pages and pages of text, and I would say to you, no, just become familiar enough with it so that when you go to look at the notes on it, it takes just a mere second or two to pick up the pieces. One of the reasons why you want this kind of familiarity is that that lends itself to believability. If you don't know what you're talking about, the players are not going to feel confident to engage with it, and therefore you would leave yourself with a lot of confusion and perhaps misdirection by players who either don't know what they're doing or are intentionally sandbagging or gaslighting you because they want manipulation of the game, and the only way they can do that is if they know the system and the lore better than you do. That means you need to have at least some core competency with the rule set. Now, most game masters have studied the guidebooks on how to be a game master. Am I looking at the right camera? I'm not. I'm supposed to be looking up here. Aha! That explains why I was feeling like somebody was staring down at me. All right. So this idea is that you need to have competency with the rule set. If you do not know what you are talking about when it comes to the rules of the game, the players are also going to feel uncertain and perhaps step up and somewhat guide the game from the inside, and that can be dangerous. That also means that at the beginning of your sessions, you need to have a pretty good idea of where the scene is going to be established, which means you need to have a really strong OSSF update. In this case, OSSF stands for Our Story So Far. And when you have a solid understanding of what's going on, where the players are, what the action was leading to in the last episode, the continuity that the players yearn and desire and need to be able to play within the realm becomes easier. They actually can put their feet down on what's going on because they know that you're actually going to be there to bolster them and to help the story get to where you wanted to go with it. Another thing that happens is you need to have an idea of a projected encounter outline. What are you going to do? And I'll be completely candid. In my case, as long as I've been doing it, I've gotten to the point where I understand the balance of what's going on. And so as long as our story so far has been nice and solid and concise, then I can progress the story whichever direction I wanted to go on the fly. And that's not always the best not always the easiest process. As a matter of fact, you may need to have notes and a checklist and everything so that the adventure will go as you sort of hope for. Now, granted, the players are going to have actions that are going to drive the direction completely away from where you focused or where you plan to go. So just allow that their actions are going to do that and learn how to ride the directional wave, if you will, of what the players bring to the table. And make sure also that you have planned for each of the players to have an equitable amount of playtime. If you are going to pontificate and you're going to extol the virtues of a situation, you are going to be reducing your players' interest. Whereas if you're allowing them to actually have to discover the lore, then they feel the ownership of it and feel the value of their continuation in the game session. And so by realizing you've got to balance this and track this on the fly as you're gaming, find ways to do so, whether it be a checklist of the characters or the, as I mentioned before, the Game Master screen that I utilize has a slit across the top that allows you to put in markers to indicate who is still to come in the turn and things like that, so it makes it easier to keep track of that way. But you also need to be able to progress the story in player terms. If all you're doing is resolving conflict, you're not giving the players anything of their needs for advancement. If in the other case you're actually progressing the story directly in association with what the players are doing, you're going to give the feeling of ownership, the feeling of belonging to the players in very real player terms, so that they will feel the progress and help push the progress of the story forward. When you are talking about personas, of course, you will need to make sure that you have a means and a methodology for providing rewards and assets to the players as they progress in the story. If there are things that they would like to accomplish that they've mentioned in passing, afford them opportunities to put their toes in the water in the areas of those particular skills and advancements. One of the easiest way to do this is to recognize what the players are wanting in the things that they say, because this allows for a fluid transition. And one of the main things that players look for in a campaign is fluidity, community, and continuity. They want to know the story is going to continue week over week, that they're going to have a place in it, and that they can make changes on the fly and you'll roll with them. So these are some of the keys to being able to put on a game, and this is kind of what you see as a game master from behind the scenes, tracking all these different elements as you progress to make sure that the players stay included in the story as well. All right, now we switch to this camera. Now I'm in the right place. All right, so last session we talked about all the different kinds of games that were out there, and I've decided this week to kind of do a variation on the theme, and we're going to talk today about all the different kinds of card games in particular. Now, if you are, like I am, an avid player of every form of games out there, it's reasonably certain that you've played one or more of these. And as we go through them, if you would please comment down below on which of these card games that you might have played with and what particular brand name or type of game that you played in that you really liked, and give us perhaps some more information if you can think of some names that I didn't get to in this group. I'd greatly appreciate that as well. So let's get started. When we talk about standard or traditional games, these are the ones that almost everybody could rattle off the top of their head. If you think of Old Maid or Crazy Eights or Slapjack or War, or there's probably dozens and dozens and dozens that are in the standard or traditional framework, forms of rummy, forms of collecting games and such. We'll get more into those in a while, but the idea here is that the standards and the traditions are perfectly wonderful games. You could spend your entire game session just exploring all the different kinds of traditional games that are out there. Maybe you want to bring together a group of game players and show them how common their roots are by playing these old and traditional games with them, and to have them remember what it was that made them enjoyable, and also which ones of them made them repetitive and literally caused them to fall off the radar. Beyond that, of course, there are the much more recognizable card games, those that are branded or standalone. Games that you can't play with another set of cards, like, for example, Uno, or I guess there's now a Monopoly card game, or just there's dozens of these that are standalone. Mealborn, 1,000 Miles. These are all games that are played with cards that are specifically branded for one purpose, and they really aren't open to the interpretation that your standard or traditional card games would be able to be played under. A third type of game, and these are probably the ones of which most of you are arguably most familiar, would be the trading card, collectible card, or living card games. And these are referred to games that have unique specific cards for the game, so they would also fall under the branded or standalone, but their elemental play structure is based on availability and access to particular cards. And in the case of collectible card games or trading card games, these are games that are fundamentally played by getting access to booster packs or random draft packs of the cards for the game, and then building your decks of cards out of what you've collected. And while these are highly enjoyable and very addictive in some fashions, they also have their detractors, because they do tend to take up a lot of space. They do represent a form of speculative purchasing, shall we say. And they're not necessarily the friends, if you will, of the long-term gamer, because they tend to either drive you into a singular path of expenditure where you're continuing to buy the new cards, or you're going to simply do what I do, which is you fall out of it from time to time, and then you're 6 months to 3 years or more out of sync with everyone else, and it takes you time to build back up. So this is a form of game that is highly popular today, but it's just one of many. The next are the hand builder games, and while these are fairly rare, they do represent a game where the cards that you pull into your set collection, so to speak, during the game session functionally acts almost like a hand of cards. They're cards that go through so quickly that they're not really, you're not truly building a deck of them. You're just simply finding which cards would suit the hand that you're playing with at this point. And there's an original one that's called Origins, and I can't remember the subtitle, but in the game Origins, you are literally building a community by drawing cards into your circle of influence and then activating those cards turn after each other in order to draw new actions and expand your collection of objective points. Others, of course, are like deck builders, and these are much more the concept of a draft or a trading card element. Therefore, there are a limited number of certain cards, and so you need to figure out how best to acquire cards to reach your objective and limit your detrimental cards, those that are useless or not as effective. Now, this next group of games has somewhat fallen out of favor, yet it still exists, and that is the statistics-driven strategy games, Stratomatic for baseball, and there are several war games by DVG Games and Dan Person Games, and the idea is that they are very much strategy-based games, depending upon the actual statistics of vehicles or personnel or players, in order to determine the success failure of a simulated version of the conflict they might have been in. And These are highly enjoyable. They tend to be cerebral. They also tend to draw people who have a specialty or a knack for subjects like it. So they're not played as broadly, perhaps, as others, but there definitely are times that it can be quite enjoyable to be involved with that if you do know the information or are at least willing to accept guide information from those that are outside of your group. The next are the word association games, and these are almost on the edge of what we classically think of as party games. They tend to play with the mental pictures of things. When you think of word association, you can think of games like apples to apples, or all of the cards against or cards for or cards with games that are out there. The idea is that you're building on the knowledge of word usage, or you're working with the memory of where certain cards reside or are functioning, and therefore playing with that information as you go forward. Now, beyond these, you have the psychosocial, and this may be more of a direct connection to the cards against concept, but the idea here is that you find cards and the terms on the cards to be associated with something, and then you build out the argument. There are games that do this with philosophy, like Otakon, and others that really focus on how people think and how they interact with each other and how they popularity things exist. Some of the ask me anything or what do you know kind of games apply to the psychosocial, and these are really talking about how we interact with the group, how we as individuals interact with the group. So even games like vampire, or not vampire, werewolf, or things like this actually kind of fit into this, and these games can be played with a card mechanic. By far, one of the more recognizable, without even realizing that they are, card games out there are almost every trivia game out there is dependent upon a stack of cards for the questions and answers, the possible options, the multiple choice formats, or whatever. And these trivia testing games are extremely popular, and particularly among those who have an affinity for the subject of which the trivia is created. So it's important, therefore, to realize how many styles and types of those kinds of games are out there so that you can find the right mix. Some people really like the flat, static yes or no answers. Some prefer a graduated variable answer, or even a game like Smarty Party that uses lists. These are all examples of trivia testing and mind expanding games, because all they're going to do is make it so you know more information. This next group falls across a couple of different spectra. We're talking about rules bending or rules changing games. The most obvious ones of these, if you're familiar with it, is the game Flex. That really has only 2 rules in the game, but as you play, the cards you put into action cause the rules of the game literally to change as you go. And these rule bending, rules altering games are great fun, and they do tend to have a rather chaotic approach, and that's, to some people's mind, the perfect way to go, whereas others, of course, would feel more out of place. The concept of rule bending games also includes those games that start with static rules and then adjust them, such as forms of magic. Even some of the classic card games like Shanghai Rummy or Chicago Rummy have a series of rules changes throughout that help to make the game more dynamic as the game flow changes moment by moment. Of course, the next category of games, I'm only going to mention just a short bit and then say that they really don't fall into the very category of games, but they need to be mentioned. That is gambling games that are played with cards. Some of them are skills based, where you're studying the persons that you're playing against. Some of them are random based, where literally it's the fall of the cards. In any case, gambling is always a risky behavior and should be considered very strongly before you include them in your game's environment. There are ways to do so, some that are more peaceful than others, but just keep in mind that these are not necessarily things that are going to be broadly conversed about on a channel like this. And then finally, the last one, and this sort of fits into all of the above in standard and traditional games, and in branded and standalone games, and even in some of the psychosocial games, you'll have set collecting or trick taking elements, and this has to do with the way the games are played. And so I only list them because there are some games like Pit or Rook where the very process is itself the mechanic of the game. So, having gone over this, of course, there are card games that are not going to fit. My question to you is, which of these card games have you played? Which ones of these would you like to hear more information about? And which ones of them would you like to watch a playthrough of? I've got the possibility of bringing to you whatever videos you'd like to have, so make sure that you let me know in the comments below or in the chat box if you want to talk to me while I'm on air. Now, we have therefore now at 11:48. Wow, I'm getting pretty good at this. Right about the same time each night, I'm getting to the conclusion. So as we get ready to close out, I do want to remind you that Jean Acker is in the hospital with a broken patella. She's recovering okay, but just to keep her in mind, and if you want to assist with her condition or anything, make sure you reach out at NycosRPG.com. So, or you can email me at NycosRPG@gmail.com. Alrighty, so I'll give you the rest of our contact information. For more information on the Nycos RPG game itself, getting a hold of a copy of the game, check out our product information at NycosRPG.com. For more information on the Nycos lore and the game world of Nycos, check out www.NycosRPG.info. Of course, you can join us on Discord if you follow the link below, and we'd love to have you join our roleplay revolution and perhaps become a participant in some of our games or even part of our community through patreon.com. The address there does include the /join because we'd love to have you become a part of the community going into 2024. For more information, you want to check out this channel every night at 11 p.m. And also our extended viewing videos are over at Nycos RPG on YouTube. So until next time, I want to thank you